from Dalton Wade Real Estate Group, and today we're joined with Julio.
Morning.
Jamal's working the camera. And today we're going to chat about protecting your buyer. So, a lot of times coming up with these topics are, since I've done so many of these training videos, they're challenging to come up with, kind of fresh and new information. And also this week, there were some things that kind of came up from some of the agents, and, things may not have gone quite as smoothly as everybody would hope. Nothing bad, but just, kind of maybe a few bumps here and there. So I thought, we might chat about some of those things and just kind of make sure that everybody's thinking, how best to, protect your client. So the first one, we've chatted about this before, which is the repair list out of the home inspection. So you do the home inspection, and, inevitably the home inspector is going to find things, and then sometimes the buyer thinks, oh, I should be getting a new house, and all those things that were noted on the inspection report should be fixed. And certainly, some of the larger ones, if you didn't see them before when you showed the property, are certainly open for discussion. But coming up with a repair list, inevitably, not always, sometimes the seller will take care of things, the correct way, but inevitably, sometimes, they won't do things right. This particular situation involved a divorce. We had asked to do the sprinkler system. We get to the final walkthrough, the sprinkler system's not functional. There was a notation about fixing the electrical, but it was kind of vague and broad in terms of exactly, and it just lent for not a pleasant experience, for the buyer at the end, and kind of almost, a level of confrontation between the buyer and seller, kind of unusual. It didn't close when it should have. Ultimately, we got everything, resolved, and it did close, but the idea again is that if a credit had been given, right, a closing cost credit, for those repairs, then, the buyer can kind of do the repairs themselves with that money that they didn't have to bring to closing. So they kind of come out in the same place, but they come out ahead actually, because then they can do the repairs. The repairs are done the way they want, and then there's no possibility of any problems with, how the repair is being done, not being done. And it just makes it a lot easier, simpler, cleaner. And again, whenever there's issues, unfortunately, and this is from my own experience, whenever there's issues, something comes up, somehow you as the agent sort of get dragged into it all. Like the agent, none of this was her responsibility. I mean, they had agreed to do things, but then they didn't do them. But it just makes for not, the most smooth closing, which unfortunately happened here. And unfortunately, it got a little bit ugly, but in the end, it got done. So again, credits, if you can get them and use them, they're just much better than repairs. I mean, these are all things to protect, again, most times the repairs will be done fine, but just from experience, there's always the chance, and with repairs, it's more of a chance that, and just the credit sort of eliminates all that. So that's really the way to go, and explain that to your client, just like that you just can't be sure that, the seller is actually going to, one of the things she wrote is all electrical to be fixed. Now what did that exactly mean? It wasn't really, detailed out and specified. It just leaves, for interpretation. So credits are always better than repair list. The next one is, a situation where the person's financing, was not guaranteed. The agent did it right. She sent over, the extension of the financing, extension of the closing, and then it comes, her client signs it. It comes back signed, but then the seller writes, if it doesn't close by a specific date, then the buyer forfeits their deposit, and writes that in, and then the buyer gets it, and then they cross it out. but then nothing is ever like, it never gets resolved beyond that. Now, the guy doesn't get the loan, and, the seller wants the deposit, part of the deposit, and again, it's left, there's ambiguity in terms of like, oh, what, did they really have an accepted, extension? By the seller writing that to me, she countered them back with, you're losing your deposit if you don't close. That never, then they sent it over, the buyer crosses it out, the seller never initials the cross out, and again, if it closes, who cares? But it didn't close, and now, it's mucked up. So, again, what should have happened is that a couple things, and again, we're still kind of figuring out, some of the, exactly what happened. But when it went over, if the buyer's agent said, well, if we don't get this signed, we're canceling the contract, or we're exercising our financing contingency, then we're probably good. If she didn't do that, she just sent it over and got signed, but then there was that sort of, you're losing your deposit verbiage, it gets a little bit more, because again, you never know, like, that seller has to sign that release to give them their money back. Then if that doesn't happen, somebody has to initiate mediation and then arbitration, and again, it just gets, and again, you can't make the seller sign, but what you want to really have is it so that, like, as best as it can ever be, that buyer has no chance of losing here, because it's a little confusing, again, it's hard to know how a mediator or arbitrator, would view it. They've got to go through all that, so it just ends up being not as, not as clean as possible, and it's not documented, kind of to the T, and that's what we got to do. So, everything has got to be run down, and again, the agent said, well, how many times can you ask for them to sign it until they weren't signing, initially. Right, that's true, but again, like, through those emails, you've got to be documenting, we're out of here, we're canceling, so that you've got a paper trail if it comes to that. That's, kind of the financing side. We've talked about that, many, many times in terms of, always protecting your buyers. Because, again, like on this particular transaction, when you're getting to the end, right, and they're supposed to have the loan, and then they don't have it, usually it's because one of two things, issues, which isn't, that good, right, or meaning, there's some, or there's issues with the buyer. There's something going on there that's not like, causing him to be like a slam dunk get the loan, and they're still working on the file. They're maybe trying to resolve some things, and when that's happening, the probability of a denial, goes up. So again, read the tea leaves and just make sure you've documented, that your buyer is going to get their deposit back. The next one we're talking about is so with FHA. So if your buyer's, getting an FHA loan and the home is a flip, meaning somebody purchased it less than 90 days ago, the property is not going to qualify for FHA. So sometimes, that might get missed, the contract goes in, it gets accepted, and then, again, the contract has to be rewritten, re-signed, again, it just makes it, so it's called the FHA 90-day seasoning rule. So if you're working, with an FHA buyer and they're buying a flip, you have to make sure that the owner, the person that's doing the flip, has owned the house for 90 days or more. Now, the other thing you got to keep, sometimes, it's close. There's also the record date, and then there's the sale date. So the sale date is the day they bought the house, and if they buy it at auction, which oftentimes happens when they're flipping, that's one date, and then it may take, that's the sale date, but it may take a week, 2 weeks for it to get recorded. That's the recording date. Different lenders use different dates. Some lenders use the sale date, some lenders use the recording date, so you've got to ask the lender what date they use, because yeah, you might look good on the sale date, right, but then the recording date, you know, took 2 weeks and it's that tight, and then all of a sudden, you know, it's an issue. So sale date, recording date, you need to know both, and you need to check with the, you know, with the lender to see like what their policy is regarding, and different lenders have different policies regarding that FHA seasoning rule on the record and sale date. So just keep that in mind. And then the next one we're talking about is FHA VA condos, and kind of the difficulty of, you know, getting them financed. So when you have, you know, when you have a conventional buyer, there's a condo questionnaire, so that sometimes can be tricky. That has to be filled out. The questions all have to be answered, you know, the correct way. That's a whole nother training, but so we're not going to talk about that today. But when they're FHA or VA, not only does the buyer have to be approved, the condo association has to be approved, and it's quite extensive, that approval process. So many condo associations are not approved. So taking your buyer, you know, your FHA VA buyer, and looking at condos, you know, probably 1 in 10, you know, in Tampa Bay are approved. So you've got, you know, you could be taking them to places that they can't even buy. So you want to be aware of that. So, so single family homes are fine, and townhomes are fine. But, and again, condos, you know, are usually not going to work. And again, the difference between a townhouse and a condo is under a condo association, and a townhouse is under a homeowners association. There are legal distinctions between the two. Townhomes are fine because those are fee simple. Condos, there's a whole nother approval process required for FHA, VA, and as I mentioned. So again, just heads up, again, because you put your client in you know, and the listing agent doesn't know, and then, you know, it doesn't go through, and we don't look so good. So 4 topics, all easy, you know, to just sort of have it go smooth. Just to review again quickly, credits are better than repairs. You know, you know, people start changing the contract, you know, writing things in. Both parties have to be, you know, initial it or it's no good. You know, the FHA 90-day seasoning rule, make sure, you know, the owner has owned it for more than 90 days. Check the record date, check the sale date, and then speak with the lender on which one they use. And then FHA, VA condos, really, unless, you know, very few of them are approved. So, you know, probably not good use of your time, you know, showing an FHA or VA buyer a condo. So, any questions from Julio or Jamal? Any questions in Periscope land? Just type it in and Jamal will let me know. Give it a minute. Alrighty, hopefully everybody found this, you know, helpful. Certainly questions are always welcome offline. And thanks for tuning in, and we'll be back next week.
Okay.
Did it say end?
Nah.
I think if you pull it down, it might.